Anticipatory grief is the grief that occurs before death. It is common among people facing the eventual death of a loved one or even their own death. Most people expect to feel grief after a loss, but fewer are familiar with grief that shows up before they experience a loss. Because this kind of grief isn't often discussed, you might worry that it's not socially acceptable to express the pain you're feeling. This video is about that subject. Viewer discretion is advised.
He has to accept that he's getting older and needs to look after himself. He should take care of himself for me because I still need him.
So, with the intro of this video and the show being discussed, I'm pretty sure for most of you that was a rather polarizing opening to see associated with a cartoon dog. But today's subject does merit a trigger warning, as we will be talking about death, or rather, the inevitability of death. And yes, we're using the preschool show Bluey as the centerpiece for this conversation. Why? Well, because I think out of all the cartoons I've watched and seen recently, this one is the one that covers it best. Anticipatory grief often isn't taken as seriously as post-mortem grief, to the point where I didn't even know there was a name to the feeling that I started to experience as I got older. Or rather, as my loved ones started getting older. Now, whenever I've seen this type of grief discussed, it's often when in relation to a family member in hospice or something similar, in which they're still alive but death is closer than it is further away. And while that certainly does apply and should not in any way be invalidated, it's also common to feel this way before a loved one is even close to the end of their natural life. And this is the instance in which you rarely see brought up in conversation. As we become adults, we're expected to roll with the punches. But the fact of the matter is that the older you get, the better you have an understanding of what's going on around you. That also means, in most cases, developing emotional intelligence. And that of course comes with its advantages, but it comes with its fair share of disadvantages too, like, well, you know, existentialism. The more you become aware of what's going on around you, the easier it is to be empathetic to others. Like, for instance, how many of you when you were little kids had a main character syndrome and didn't care or consider what your parents or guardians felt? Probably a ton, and that's because when we're younger, it's hard to see our caretakers as individuals who have their own thoughts and feelings because our emotional and empathetic skills aren't developed. This development actually has a name, and it's called theory of mind, and it's rather interesting if you had an hour or two to burn on independent reading. Anyways, since this is something you develop more as you get older, it's only natural that you'd start seeing people older in your life as individuals rather than simply caretakers or adults you just happen to see a few times a year. You start to become mindful of how you interact with them, and your interactions become more catered around shared interests than only something you liked as a child. This is why, in general, with neurotypical children and teens, you see them asking far less offensive questions and making far less offensive observations than they would when they were little.
How many friends have you got?
3?
That's not many. Why have you only got 3 friends?
Well, back to him.
You build a different type of relationship that's more on mutual ground, and that makes it easier to empathize with them and see them more like you would a person the same age as you, and not a mythical human being known as an adult. It often helps relationships be more fulfilling, and you get more out of them when you have a bond that you both made together. But learning to see people who are older than you as human means accepting that they're not invincible or immortal in the same way that you aren't. That brings us to the discussion of today's Season 2 Bluey episode, Granddad. Now, Granddad is one hell of a good episode because it covers 3 entirely different stages of life and viewpoints. You have Chili, who is experiencing anticipatory grief over her aging father, Bluey and Bingo, who are still developing their empathetic skills and are mostly unaware of why their mom is so upset and hard on their grandfather, and Chili's father, Mort, who is mourning the loss of his youth and not taking Chili's concerns to heart because of it. It perfectly showcases the natural cycle of different life stages without talking down on any of them or making it seem as if there's one who's in the wrong in this scenario. The episode starts off with Chili and her kids visiting her father after he'd had heartworm and had to have surgery as a result, which, based on word association, is probably the equivalent to a heart attack in humans given his age. Understandably, that's a major health scare for both Mort and Chili to experience, and one that Bingo and Bluey don't understand the gravity of due to being so young, which is why when Mort is knowingly disobeying doctor's orders, Bluey and Bingo are keen to follow along with their grandfather and just have fun, unknowingly encouraging dangerous behavior that Chili has the justification to be worried about. Straight from the get-go, Mort is chopping down wood and not resting as he should be. Since Chili's visit was likely to check up on him and see if he was recovering properly or needed any help, she's in a bit of a shock to see him doing something that is detrimental to his health at this time. Instead of stopping like Chili asks, he runs off with Bingo and Bluey to escape the nagging of his daughter. The episode makes it a point to talk about how Chili was when she was a child, and how her father is reminiscing about when he was younger. But throughout the episode, it becomes clear that there was a good reason for Chili insisting that he rest, to the point that Bluey and Bingo begin to pick up on it as well, despite not fully understanding the gravity of the situation. He needs frequent breaks to catch his breath, has swollen thumbs, unreliable memory, and in general is struggling to keep up with his grandkids, which it seems as if he isn't willing to accept and insists that he's fine and that decisions about his health should be left up to him. He begins to have his own epiphany when he argues with Bluey about eating her pumpkin seeds, and she throws the same argument back at him. This is the first instance of him making the connection that his daughter is only telling him to do what the doctor recommends, because just like he wants Bluey to grow strong, she wants him to recover.
Paddle, Grandad!
I can't! My thumbs! You kids will have to do it.
This is why you have to rest.
Well, this is why you have to be big and strong.
When you're younger, you need to be taken care of, and a lot of the times older people need similar care. And because they're used to being independent for so long, sometimes it's hard for older folks to accept that they need help and can no longer do what they need to or want to by themselves. This is actually grief in of itself, though they're not grieving another person so much as they are the younger version of themselves that was independent. It's hard to come to terms with aging, and not everybody does. This often gets them into trouble and puts their family members in distress when it does. I'm sure a lot of you have had an older family member fall doing something that they weren't supposed to or overestimating their mobility. And sometimes accidents just happen without a known cause. But not accepting their aging body, that also manifests into this "I can do this, they don't know what they're talking about" mentality that gets them hurt. And these types of incidents can trigger episodes of anticipatory grief, as it's a very uncomfortable reminder that they're not immortal. I think the first time I ever experienced this form of grief was when I was watching my cats age. I'd had them since I was 5 years old, and I remembered when they were young and healthy rather than elderly and sporting a host of age-related health problems. Watching as arthritis made it harder for them to jump and their bodies stopped working properly, there were some nights where I was overcome with sadness about the inevitability of them either passing in their sleep or being put down. And in some ways, the grief before their passing was worse than the day that it actually happened, because you don't know when it's coming, just that it's coming soon and you know it will hurt. And that combines two of the things that human beings cannot and will not ever handle well: uncertainty and change. When you have a loved one that isn't taking their health seriously, let's say for example, Mort, that feeling is omnipresent. It's not just bouts or occasional thoughts, it's a persistent worry with every incident that isn't treated seriously. And in Chili's case, being reminded of her father's mortality is understandably distressing. Even if you can't prevent death, it is possible to prolong it in some cases, such as taking medicine or accepting treatment for a potentially fatal health issue or following recommendations from your doctor. In that case, it's much easier to push the grief away when you know that you still have at least a little time left remaining. Chili even admits later in the episode wherein she states that she still needs him and isn't ready to let him go yet. As someone with aging parents, this scene hit me maybe a bit too hard. I've had similar conversations with my mom before and about how she needs to take it easier because eventually she's going to get hurt. Recently, she got a compression fracture from a fall that she had when she was doing something she wasn't supposed to do, and that was probably the most anxiety-fueled couple of days I've ever experienced. Guardians, the young people in your life still need you. While your health is up to you, it would be nice if you took into consideration how your decisions are affecting your loved ones who are watching all of this happen and need to deal with the fallout once you're gone. Death sucks, It's hard enough dealing with post-mortem grief, but Anticipatory is its own special kind of hell to go through. The episode ends on a bittersweet note with Mort listening to his daughter and taking a rest while the two of them watch Bluey and Bingo play. Then, of course, because this is Bluey and I wouldn't be making a video about it if it didn't have musical swelling and tears, this scene happens.
I remember when you used to take me swimming here.
Yeah, me too.
That was a long time ago.
No, it was yesterday.
At its core, this is an episode about grief. Anticipatory from Chili, and Mort grieving his youth and all that went with it. Bluey and Bingo are not yet old enough to fully process these things, but they do make the connections on why their mom is so upset and are beginning to reach that understanding. It's such a great episode because it's speaking to multiple audiences while giving the same message of being empathetic and understanding how your actions affect others. And generally, when a kid's show teaches empathy, it's hardly ever with adults as the target and is mostly with other children that are different from them. While not a bad message, it is one that's been done in many times before. And this isn't new territory with Bluey, as it covers children being empathetic towards their parents in other episodes such as Octopus, which is one of my other favorites. I guess making this video is sort of a way for me to vent about my feelings regarding this topic, and I hope it has been for you too if it's something that you're dealing with. I highly recommend watching or even showing your loved one this episode if it resonates with you. Media has a way of putting things into an easily digestible perspective for a lot of people, which is why it's such a valuable asset for teaching. Humans are never done learning, no matter how old they are, and sometimes I think that's easy to forget. You can still learn something from a piece of media that you assume is an easily dismissible preschool show, you just have to be open to it. And that's why the creators behind it are as thoughtful as they were, knowing that parents and grandparents will be watching with their child or grandchild. It's not just for them, it's for everybody. It touches upon an issue that every family goes through and that every human being goes through. If anything, I hope that if you are experiencing anticipatory grief, you now know the term for it and that you aren't alone. There's a ton of people who are always experiencing the exact same thing that you are. It helps to focus on the time you still have left, rather than on the inevitable. And if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell to be notified of when I upload. I'm actually back now, so expect new videos soon. Special thank you to my top tier patrons: Ambrose Rothwood, Jeffy Games, Brandon Nunes, The Lovely Ghosty, Sadin Suzuki, Charlotte Allen, Lee Taylor, Zachary Ansley, and Harriana Hook. Because of people like them, I can continue to make content like this. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Have an amazing day, guys.